Okay, today we have had Mars move into 0 degrees of the sign of Aries, where it's at home. And we've got some stuff that's going on at the moment because what's going to happen is that it's the 9th of April or April 9th. So you can see Mars here at 0 degrees. That was in the UK, that would have been at 7:36 p.m. And it is conjunct Neptune, but it will be moving over Neptune, then it will move over Saturn, and then it will keep going forward. And we'll have a look at that. I'll push it forward and we'll have a look. But the most interesting thing is that we've got Uranus at 29 degrees of Taurus. And a little bit about that. This is the collective threshold, Uranus at 29 degrees of Taurus. And it's a genuinely rare and significant moment in collective astrology. Uranus reached 29 degrees, or it reaches only every 84 years. The thing is, it did reach 29 degrees last year, and it was in May last year, it was in Gemini briefly, and I think July. And we are going to be seeing this move into Gemini on April 25th. But the situation with the Uranus at 29 degrees, that only happens only every 84 years, apart from the retrograde, so it can happen a couple of times as it moves through. And the last time that it was at 29 degrees, apart from last year, would have been in the 1940s, in the thick of the Second World War. And it's the anaretic degree of any sign carries the quality of maximum pressure before transformation. And we can see that we are under a lot of pressure collectively at this time. Everything the planet has been doing in that sign reaches its peak of intensity. It's a crisis point, the 29th degree, before the energy completely changes shape, which we will see when it moves into Gemini in April. So Uranus has been in Taurus since 2018 and systematically disrupting everything Taurus rules, like fixed material structures, economies, currencies, banking, debt, the body and embodied life, the earth itself, land, food systems. We've seen a lot of changes in agriculture. We've seen a lot of things go on around the world, and rules and regulations that were tried to be brought in, and apparently Bill Gates buying up the land as well. Who knows how much of that is true, but it seems to be the case, the control mechanisms. And also the natural world. So the Taurus and security, what we thought was stable, permanent, unmovable. And at 29 degrees, all of that is at a maximum rupture. The structures that have been shaking since 2018 are now at their most critical and, to be destabilized. And the anaretic degree often carries what hasn't been resolved. So the unfinished business of the entire transit compressed into a final urgent moment. And for Uranus and Taurus collectively, that unfinished business includes the questions of who owns the earth and the body, land rights, food sovereignty, bodily autonomy, the economic earthquake that began in 2018 that hasn't been settled. And there's a lot of things that have not been settled. People are wanting other people's land and resources. And that's what a lot of these wars are about. It's generally about resources as well. And there's also a somatic cost of collective trauma, as we've seen with the situation with the shock to our body, with the, injections that were handed out in 2021, 2022, and, do we have the right to our own bodily decisions? The somatic costs of stress as well, and complex trauma. So the collective trauma and what populations have carried in their bodies that hasn't yet been named, so we carry things in our bodies and emotions and memories as well that we haven't been able to maybe name for ourselves. So there is something about this 29-degree Taurus that insists the body story must be told before we move into the realm of pure information, because that is what, when this 29th degree moves into 0 degrees of Gemini, as it did last year, now it's really in Gemini at that point. We basically, the story must be told before we move on to that. And if we think of a volcano that's been building pressure for 7 years at 29 degrees, it's at the final moment before its eruption. So it'll be very interesting to see what goes on in the next couple of weeks. And the astrology, I've seen other astrologers talk about this, that it's going to be a very tricky period for a couple of weeks, I think from the 15th but until around the 20th plus a few days. And in April, so if I move this chart forward by days and I move to the 25th, so we can see this Uranus in Gemini. Right, that's the 25th, and you can see it's 29:59, so we want to go an hour ahead to, there you go. So at this point, it will be in Gemini, and the moon, where's the moon at that point? The moon will be at 0 degrees of Virgo as well at that point. So this is 16 days away from now, and it's like a big release, a volcanic release, and what was felt in the body becomes language. So what we're feeling, so this could be collective anger about what's taking place in the world, and it could be other things that we're not aware of at this time, because Uranus can bring, it's the electricity, the electrical movement through our body, all of the information. There could be information coming forward and such like. So Uranus in Gemini will be there for the first time since 1942. But remember about last year where it did become 0 degrees of Gemini and then it did a retrograde. So everything alive on Earth, this has been, everyone living right now, has lived their entire life under a sky that has not held this configuration, and this configuration also of Neptune in Aries as well. None of us have had that. Many of us have had, if we're over the age of 30, we've lived through Saturn in Aries. So, and Chiron as well is in Aries, so that would have been around 50 years ago. And this, if we take into account the last time that it was in Gemini, officially 1942, and when Uranus moves through Gemini, it's a disruption at the level of information, language, communication, and the nervous system. And it's the transmission of ideas between minds. And it does not do this slowly in the Taurian way, because Taurus is very slow moving forward. And with this energy, it's like the grinding the tectonic way. It's like Gemini disruption is sudden and it's electrical and it's non-linear and it moves at the speed of thought. We can think really quickly. Could say the speed of light as well, maybe. I don't know if we think quicker than the speed of light, though. So we're already living in the early symptoms of this, the AI rewriting what language means and who produces it, the collapse of consensus reality into 1,000 competing information ecosystems, the acceleration of communication to at a speed which we can barely settle with before it becomes obsolete. Things are changing so quickly. We can see that, and the deep uncertainty about what is true, who is speaking truth, and whether any transmission can now be trusted, because we can see with the videos, people can appear to be one person, but all of these technological advances means that we actually don't know what is truth. So I've got into a habit when I see things on social media, I double check. I mean, whether we can even double check and know something's the truth is questionable as well. So the previous Uranus in Gemini transit was 1934 to 1942, and it coincided with radio becoming mass communication technology for the first time. And a single voice at that time could reach millions, which was, if you think, in my lifetime, I didn't have a mobile phone until I was around age 30, or a computer. And a single voice reaching millions, propaganda perfected as an art form, and the fracturing of political reality into, like not being able to understand the ideological different camps that there are. And it's almost like we can't really know who's who anymore, because what are people standing for? And each thing has got its own information architecture. The early theoretical foundations of computing, for instance, as well, would have gone way back. And the nervous system is also rewired during this transit. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out for the human body. And now we arrive at this one with technologies on an entirely different understanding and magnitude. We just don't know what's coming into existence. And Uranus in Gemini will ask, with increasing urgency over the next 7 years, because it's going to be 7 years, what is real transmission and what is the authentic voice, and what does it mean to actually communicate with infrastructure of communication that has been so thoroughly disrupted, because it has been. It can seem like a lot of noise and too much. I do something where I sit down every day and I do they're called morning pages, and they were Julia Cameron, who wrote The Artist's Way, talks about those. And about 2 years ago, I started doing 3 pages of writing a day, just all of my gunk that I wanted out of my system, or my moans about the world, or things I wanted to think about, or things I was considering. And when I look back now, I've got this huge pile of paper that's 3 years of writing, just my thoughts. So using pen and paper, I think, is really important as well, that we don't lose those skills, and reading books and listening to books on Audible, and not just, pushing those things to the side. Because if we have electrical outages as well with electricity, then we're not able to scroll our mobile phone or even listen to Audible. Actually, what we'd have to do is read a book if we want to read, or maybe write down our thoughts. So I like the old school way. As much as I love technology, I do like to use my pen and notepad. So the sky alongside the ingress of Aries in April 2026, Uranus stands at this threshold preparing to cross, and looks at what is gathered in Aries. So if we look at what's happening here, we can see that Mars at that point, I'm going to go days back and go back to this Mars moving over Neptune, because this can feel a bit uncomfortable, the Mars going over Neptune. And I made some notes on this. So Mars going over Neptune it can make us feel a bit irritable, because we've got our dreams, we've got Mars, and it can feel a bit strange. It arrives conjunct both Neptune and Saturn, also gathered in the early degrees of Aries. And this is not a simple Mars return to its home territory. It's where Mars is hemmed in on both sides by 2 of the most demanding outer planets, one dissolving and one constricting. So Neptune is dissolving and Mars is constricting, and this is all a conjunction up here. We'll see how many days this plays out. So we could feel restless and not quite name it, irritable without a clear object, an impulse to act that keeps losing its shape before it lands anywhere. And this is Neptune doing what Neptune does, not obstructing so much as dissolving. So it's dissolving something. The very ground we're going to stand on can feel like it's dissolving. And that's because when we look at what's going on in the world, it can, particularly geographically where we are, it can be much harder for some people that are in the middle of these war zones. So Mars conjunct Neptune, what it does support, and this matters, is action that has surrendered, you know, it's where we're being of service and helping people, and work that's done that is, not hidden, in also in those conditions, Neptune does not obstruct it, it channels. So the question is for this, who is this really for? So when we're doing something, it's really who it's for. If we're really worrying about something, it's like, well, who is this really for as well? Because we need to keep our stress levels really managed at this time and have some grounding in our own lives, which is really important because the higher our stress levels are, and the cortisol and the adrenaline, what can happen is that we dampen down our own immune system. So it's really important that we do, either breathing exercises or even humming. If I've watched a few videos on that. And if you hum, you're creating this nitrate oxide. I could be wrong, but nitrate oxide in the nose. So if I go on the underground now and there's lots of people around, I'll just hum under my, not so people can hear me, but it's basically keeping the airways really sort of healthier by humming. So that's worth knowing. And then also doing things that we like to do is really important as well. Setting a time aside for things that we're passionate about. And Mars conjunct Saturn as well. You can see Mars will conjunct Saturn. And this is, roughly around the same time period as now. So where Neptune dissolves and Saturn compresses, there will be a quality of frustration going on and resistance of wanting to move and finding the way blocked. So we may feel like we're being blocked to do what we want to do, particularly with the oil prices going up as well. I can see, clearly what the knock-on effect is. And have found throughout my life when things do go up, maybe not the petrol, but, when foods go up and stuff like that, they generally do not go back down. So even though the oil prices may be resolved, companies don't tend to reduce prices. I mean, maybe gas and electric they would, but we'll see how that plays out over the next 6 months. And then also here, people around us may feel like obstacles as well. There could be anger, that Mars energy, but Saturn, we may not be able to really express our anger as well. So Saturn is asking for us not to suppress that energy, but redirect it. So Mars, it's a redirection of energy, that testosterone. We've all got testosterone in us, but men have about 20-30% more than women. So, how are we going to work with that? It could be working out or, doing something that's getting rid of that excess energy. So Saturn does respect any efforts we make. And if, it doesn't respect recklessness. So we don't want to be reckless. And then taken together, Mars is at the well point, the beginning of the 0 degrees. And it's not grounded, and it's not at that point, and it's not patient. It's like a heroic charge. It wants to charge ahead. So let's see if I now go days ahead. This is the 13th of April. We're on the 9th at the moment. And then it goes over Mars, goes over Neptune on the 14th, and then 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, 20, and then it goes over. So look here, we've got Mercury involved as well. It gets more exciting by the moment. So then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 planets all in Aries on the 20th of April. So we can see this may, cause us some issues. So, and Uranus at the threshold preparing to cross, as we know, because it's not quite there at 29-40 degrees. That's the 20th of April. That is that point of like volcanic sort of eruption. It's preparing to cross, and we know what's gathered in Aries, which I've just gone through with the, if we go back to today, which is the 9th. We've got Mars at 0 degrees, not quite there, hours. Moving ahead, so it's there. So we've got Mars at 0 degrees, Neptune at 2 degrees, Saturn at 6, the Sun at 19, Chiron at 26. So this is a stellium that of multiple planetary principles compressed into a single sign. It's like a pressure chamber. And the sign is Aries, as we know, the sign of the beginning of the self as a distinct and initiating force of the body, as the primary instrument of will. You know, really, Carl Jung talked about the libido, and I see Mars contained within that. Like, we haven't always got full control over our reactions, but generally, as we work on ourselves, we have more control as we move through life. And I think that, you know, we just need to know what we're directing, where we're directing this energy at, because Mars is, you know, at the 0 degrees Aries is the world point, the absolute origin of the entire zodiac, the place where every cycle begins. It begins at 0 degrees Aries. Mars is in its own sign and it's raw and undiluted, the principle of initiation. And it's also conjunct Neptune, as we've said, which is 2 degrees away on this day, on the 9th of April, which means that the very moment of pure sort of Martian clarity, it's with that dreamlike Neptunian energy as well. And it's accompanied by dissolution, you know, the breaking down of things, the removing the fog as well. The signal and the static energy arrive together, and every action taken carries a quality of either inspired devotion or confused misdirection. So if you're confused, it's better not to act, you know, it's better to just step back and think about the pros and cons of any situation that we're in. And the two here, we'll see how it plays out in the next week. Then that Saturn at 6 degrees can be felt in the same breath because it's connected in there. Saturn in Aries is in its detriment. It's not comfortable there. Aries wants to move forward and ask questions, and Saturn demands evidence, form, proof of worthiness before a single step can be taken. But then when that tension is held rather than collapsed, it produces something extraordinary. The will has been tested and not broken. And I think we're going through that at the moment. You know, it's like our will is being tested at the moment. And Saturn is asking us really, can we sustain this? And whatever it is, you know, can we sustain war? Can we sustain the way we're doing things? You know, what do we need to look at in our own lives? What is unsustainable and what do we want to sustain? And it's not just, you know, what we're beginning with. It's like we all begin things like we might decide, oh, I'm going to go and join the gym or something, and then we don't stay with it because it sort of burns off and we just can't be bothered anymore. So we want to be looking a little bit ahead. The Sun at 19 degrees Aries, it says 20 there, but around there. It's the integrating principle and it's illuminating, it's lighting up the others as well because they're all together, or even though it's a bit far away up there. It's Neptune lighting up Mars, Neptune and Saturn are behind it and moving towards Chiron ahead. So Chiron is the wound. So this is going to take place, if I go days ahead, Chiron takes around 50 years around the chart. So we've got that on the 16th of April as well. And that's pre this moment where Uranus moves into Gemini as well. So it can be at this point, and we've got the Saturn conjunct Mars as well. So it's the wound. And this is very interesting because there is a wound, there's an unspoken wound, and there is a wound that basically does exist, you know, and our wounds want to be worked with as well. Not the wound to emotions of the mind. It's not just the mind emotions, it's the wound to, you know, our physical being as well. And, when we feel wounded, our personal agency is not as powerful or strong when we're walking around with all of these wounded feelings or bodies that are struggling. So this sense can be carried on. So the sense of this can be carried on throughout our life, and it can be impulsive that we keep going back to the past. But this is it's very hard for some people that have been through such hard traumas that it's difficult to pull ourselves completely out because also it's part of our personality. But where we can help ourselves at the 26th of degree Aries Chiron, it's in its late passage through the sign, and it will be moving into the sign of Taurus, which is interesting because that's wounding around resources. So we can see where this is heading a bit in the next year. And Uranus entered Taurus in 2018 and is now moving towards that completion. And then Chiron then moves into Taurus. So all of this is, very activated stuff. Chiron is the initiation, the discipline that is needed. It can also inspire us to help others as well. So looking at all of this together, the Uranus at 29 degrees Taurus is maximum pressure, and then insisting that what has been carried in the body must find a voice before the world moves on. So we can look to our own lives. Where does my body need to find a voice? And a stellium in Aries pressing on the wound of agency, the wound of voice, the wound of the self's basic right to act and be heard. Because a lot of us aren't being heard. If you look at things like the Epstein files and wars, it's all dampened down. What the average human being thinks of these things is completely not taken into account. And then we all end up paying the cost for these wars that are carried out by people that are given, whether they're given it, I mean, we're all part of it, that we all expect things to be run and work for us. We all want our water delivered to our house and our gas and electricity. So in a way, we're all in this together. And so it's going to be very interesting when that Uranus crosses into Gemini and how the infrastructure is going to work through and how our voice will be able to be used in order to transform what's been going on. Because I would think that going back, if we go back in time to when the radio began to be used and millions of people could hear voices that they would never have heard before, we're in a similar time. It's a bit messy because we don't know what's real and what isn't real, but I think things are going to not all be doom and gloom. I think some of it's going to be really good stuff. So we're doing a rewrite really by that Gemini Uranian energy. And I think it's going to be interesting. Let me know where Uranus is for you. For me, it's going to land on my natal sun at 0 degrees 16 arc of my chart. So I'm looking forward to that. I had it a bit last year. I think I had it on the 15th of May, 2025. I was looking at my chart yesterday, and I think it was also in July, it was still there as well at 0 degrees. I think it went. So it's been on my sun already, but this is the real thing now. It's doing that re entry, and then it won't go back onto my sun after this point. So I'm going to enjoy it. And it's in my seventh house, and I can see how that's been playing out in my life. It's quite interesting what area, this is the thing, where is Uranus in your chart at 0 degrees at Gemini? You can let me know in the video below. Thanks for listening.